Welcome, everybody. First, just want to say I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it last week, and I'm super grateful to Shay for holding down the fort. And oh, that was a phrase that I've decided has to come out of my vernacular, but pretty sure it's a war reference. But thank you, Shay, for leading the group, and thank you, everybody, for the great movement we made last week. So for those who are joining from the public, if you want to follow along on the agenda, you can find that in the Brattleboro.org page under the Community Safety Review Committee.
This is Shay, the other facilitator. I'm joining by phone today because I'm quarantining with rural, rainy internet. So I apologize that you can't see my beautiful face, but I want to mention that you can raise your hand on the phone by doing *9. I don't know if Emily mentioned that. And also, Emily, it was easy to facilitate last time. No worries.
Thank you. Okay. Great. So today we're going to start off, I'm just getting my accurate agenda here. We're going to start off with intros and establishing committee roles. Today we are going to ask for a timekeeper and a note taker. And whoever's the timekeeper, we will send you a timekeeping agenda to help us with that, where we've established general timeframes we'd like to stick to for each agenda item. But first we can start with intros, and I'll start since my microphone's already off. I'm Emily Megas Russell, she, her pronouns, and a visual description is that I am sitting in a room with a black shirt on, I have curly hair, the room is whitish, and there's blue curtain behind me. And so for others who would like to introduce themselves, you can share your name, your pronoun, visual description, and if there's anything else they'd like to say, feel free. For committee members, thank you. Check.
I can go next. I'm Lana Dever, and I am a brown-skinned woman with braids and a black and white sweater on, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'll go next. Kelsey Rice, she, her pronouns. I think my energy is a little intense this evening because another police officer in the state of Vermont killed a woman and killed himself. Although they haven't announced it was related to domestic violence, pretty much indicates that it was. And I would just like to say that, as I said to Chief Fitzgerald recently, it's a lot easier to make public statements about issues going on nationally than it is to talk about them in a public manner when they're going on in your own department. And we have yet to have any kind of public statement about 2 officers in the Brattleboro Police Department being charged with domestic violence crimes in the recent past and what that message sends to the survivors in our community. So I really look forward to talking more with Brattleboro PD. I've talked to them quite a lot. They've been very receptive to me, but I've received no explanations, no apologies for the ball being dropped in my case, despite my more than forgiving approach. And I expect better, and I demand better. Just like Black Lives Matter, women's lives matter, and violence against women extends beyond all cultural, ethnic, socioeconomic divides. So I certainly don't think that police officers are all abusers by any means. However, they swear to an oath to serve and protect us, and those police officers respond to domestic violence calls. So I'll leave it at that. Sorry, everybody, but I had to say something. A woman died.
Hi, my name is Darlene Derby. I am outside. My background picture is my mom and my dad. When they were 19, they got married. I'm standing outside in a white bathrobe with a gray hoodie. And I use she, her pronouns. Thanks.
I can go. It's hard for me to read the room because I can't see all of you. This is Shay. I'm one of the facilitators. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. There's no visual description because I'm coming in by phone. And I want to acknowledge what you said, Kelsey, and I read about that as well. I think we'll have more time to get into the substantive conversation after intros, but I just want to acknowledge the reality that so many of us are bringing to these conversations. So many of us are bringing our own experiences to these conversations, and that has to do with national moments and local moments that make the news and local moments that don't make the news. So my heart is with your heart, and I hear you.
Thank you, Shay.
Yeah, I also appreciate you just sharing where you're at this evening, Kelsey. That feels really good that you can do that with us, especially. My name's Laura Stavis, and I use she, her pronouns, and I have short brown hair, and I have headphones on, and I'm in a room with some interesting earrings behind me.
Hi, I'm Annalise Griffin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm sitting against a white background that looks sort of fake, but is not. And I'm wearing a brown sweater that is like kind of exactly the same color as my hair, and headphones.
Hi, or sorry. My name's Maya. I use she, her pronouns. I'm sitting in front of a window. Let's see. Yeah, I'm feeling a little zoomed out this evening, but also Kelsey just like reading the article because I had not heard about that. So I'm feeling a little disoriented based on those two things, but I'm looking forward to getting into this tonight.
So I'm Bob Ozer, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm sitting in front of a door which I partially painted, and I'm a white person. And the subject that Kelsey talked about came up briefly today at the governor's press conference, and the governor didn't really say much about it, but he lives in Berlin. So he did acknowledge it. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, and it looks like I think everybody who is a committee member that I can see, and Shay on the phone, has done an intro, and it looks like we're missing Drift and Kaz.
And Kaz let us know ahead of time that they wouldn't be able to make it. So we knew that absence as of today.
Okay, so let's determine who would like to be timekeeper and who would like to be note taker. So note taker will be responsible for taking notes for this meeting today and sending them to Shay and I for review and submission. And they need to be submitted to the town and posted within 5 days of the meeting. So is anybody feeling up for that task today? Laura is raising her hand. She did do it last week, I know, so I'll give another opportunity in case anybody else wants to help. But thank you, Laura. You look at the ready.
You did a great job.
You feel up for doing
It honestly
again?
helps me focus, so I really don't mind.
All righty. Go for it. Thank you.
And Laura, I'm emailing you the agenda just so that you can have something to work off of if that works for you.
Great, thanks. And then does anybody feel up for trying to keep us on track time-wise? What that would look like is one of us will email you an agenda that has some time guidelines. You'll keep an eye on the time and you'll chime in to let us know when we have maybe 2 minutes left or 1 minute left, and then when our time is up. Lana, you feel available for that? Thank you. Shay, can you send Lana that agenda?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. And I do just want to name in logistics, one moment, that the chat is on. Please use it to chat just publicly. If you need to chat directly to one of the facilitators, you can do that as well. I believe those are your only options.
And also, we're using the chat minimally. The way to use to have your comments be public comment is to wait until the public comment section. Chat can be really helpful for logistical questions. We're trying to read the chat out loud into the space when it's relevant or possible, acknowledging that we can't do that fully all the time. So, you know, if there's substantive discussion happening in the chat, it can be challenging for folks like me who are on the phone and others. So try to raise your hand, and we'll try to make time for public comment if you're at all able to participate in that way. The chat can be a great accessibility tool, but it can also be hard for other parts of accessibility if too much is happening there.
Right, and if you need something read for you, you can raise your hand and put it in the chat. That way we know when public comment comes up. That way we know that you need it read for you, and we're happy to do that. Otherwise, as Shay said, please use the raise hand function under the public comment for that. And committee members, feel free to use the chat if you need something read for you as well, and unmute and feel free to participate in the dialogue as you're inspired to. Alrighty, so we'll do a brief somatic grounding practice to land us here together. So committee members, you're welcome to turn your camera off if you'd like to, or you can keep it on, that's up to you. And everyone who wants to participate, you're welcome to keep your eyes open or close them. Either way is fine. And if your eyes are open, you might want to fix your gaze on something, or softly fix your gaze on something unmoving. Either way, eyes open or closed, go ahead and bring your attention inside your body. Being on a Zoom call with lots of people keeps our attention pretty focused outside of ourselves. And a lot of times in meetings like this, we're pretty directed by our mind, our thoughts. But I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that we're more than just our thoughts. We are whole beings, and let's see if we can invite our whole selves into the meeting, even if we're mostly thinking and speaking and sharing, and that's the way that we're joining together today, listening. See if in this moment you can just acknowledge where your whole being is at. Taking a moment here just to notice what's present for you today. Are there any emotions or sensations that are knocking at your door, trying to get your attention? Just taking this brief moment here to give yourself your attention. See if there's anything you can do, any thoughts, any self-talk, any breath that you can offer to yourself and to those sensations or emotions that are rising up. Any validation or affirmation that you need. Now is a good time to offer it to yourself. Taking just a few more breaths here. And then releasing the practice when you're ready. And you can turn your camera on when you're ready. And if at any point during the meeting you feel a sensation or an emotion that's really knocking at your door, so to speak, the nice thing about a Zoom meeting is you can turn the camera off and you can take a few moments to take care of yourself. That's very welcome in this meeting. No questions asked. And I too want to acknowledge and say thanks to Kelsey for centering what's present for you and others, as well throughout this process. It's important for us to acknowledge as we move through this process that this isn't just a thought process. This isn't just a cognitive or sort of investigative or scientific review of any kind. This is a whole person, a whole body, whole being, whole community experience that we're having. And so let's see if we can challenge ourselves in this really verbal and heady society to really invite in all of ourselves. So thank you for practicing. All right, and our next agenda item is a check-in and review, and Shay is going to lead us in that.
Emily, if you want to pull up the agreements and screen share them, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'm just going to read them aloud.
Yeah, I will screen share them.
Committee members, we sent this to folks ahead of time. This is a formatted version of the sort of agreements that we made last time together. These are things that we're going to aim toward, not that we're going to be punitive about not doing perfectly every time. And that's the first part of our check-in, is just going to be for us to make sure we're all on the same page about that. I'm going to read them. In the process of doing work with, what's that?
Nothing, go ahead. Sorry.
You're okay, no worries. In the process of doing work within the Community Safety Review Committee, we will aim to be curious, acknowledge that we come from different places and different life experiences, center anti-racism as foundational in this process, center anti-oppression, including work to avoid and end racism, sexism, transphobia and homophobia, ableism, saneism, and all forms of oppression. Particularly, sanist expression can look like pathologizing language, outing people's psychiatric labels, or engaging with people discriminatorily due to their psychiatric labeling or disability. Be kind whenever possible. Use respectful language always. Use both and thinking instead of either or thinking whenever possible. I recognize the irony in having written it that way. Use whoa, ouch, oops to pause, acknowledge hurt, and take responsibility. Acknowledge or apologize, when we hurt each other, even if we didn't intend harm. Hold space for probable good intentions while acknowledging that intention and impact both do matter. Welcome feedback and accountability from one another enthusiastically and give it generously. Hold a larger vision of big intergenerational world-changing work and honor realistically the short time frame and limited scope of this one effort inside of that long arc. acknowledge the contradictions, be generous and reverent of people's lived experiences, especially stigmatized experiences like incarceration, arrest, poverty, homelessness, abuse, and addiction. Check our biases individually and together. Work to attune to safety, value the quality of our human experiences together, and aim to make things safer while acknowledging that safety looks different for each person and is never guaranteed. And lastly, make change in our community through both the process and the production of outcomes. I think we had a great discussion about this last time, and I think my hope is that if people feel misrepresented or like they really need that language to shift in some way, this would be a space for folks to clarify important changes to make. And I think that we can add to this. I hope that this is a living set of agreements, because all of our agreements and boundaries are alive. Thank goodness we don't have to stick to the agreements we made when we were 13 or whatever. I'd still be like holding hands with some really gross person or something. So if you have anything to add or something to check, this would be space to do that. And I can't see you, so just hop in. Is there any discussion, Emily? Any hands? Any?
I don't see it. I'm sharing my screen, so
Oh, exciting!
I'm struggling with seeing the whole picture, if you will. But does anyone have anything they want to say or ask or challenge or question about these?
Committee members, just popcorn in there. Unmute yourself because we can't see you very well.
I'm in agreement with what you just read.
Great.
Sounds good. Looks good to me.
Great.
Sounds good to me too.
Awesome.
Yep, me too. It looks good.
Thanks, everyone, for your individual verbal validation of this agreement. I'm grateful.
So Shay, we have someone from the community has raised their hand. Gary Stroud. Is this a good time? Do we want to wait for our public comment sections, or is this a good time for folks to share thoughts on the agreements?
I will say that this is agreements within the committee, so I'm open to the committee's feeling about whether or not it's a space for public comment. We were going to wait to take public comment until a little bit later, especially in that we started a little bit late due to tech and important check-ins that were a little longer. But I'm open to that.
I don't think Gary was here at the last meeting where we discussed an item that he put on the agenda, or helped us put on the agenda. So if we just want to speak to that for a second, and then we can maybe talk about it at the end. It's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Last time, this is still the check-in and review section of the agenda, so it feels pretty relevant. Last time we let folks know in the committee about what an alternate process might look like. It might look like opening back up the existing candidates to the select board for voting, and beyond that would be a bit complicated. The committee agreed that delay seemed like it would cost us a lot given our short time frame, and that we were eager to engage people in other ways than committee alternates for the time being. Regarding the CPCC specifically, we looked into ways to engage with them as another committee, technically and legally, and that might look like either two representatives from each committee meeting to discuss something that we agree we need to discuss, or holding a jointly warned public meeting together. And everybody named that they were eager to include Gary specifically's feedback and perspective through the CPCC process, part of the process, or as a member of the public, of which we're about to, in this very meeting, clarify many, many, many ways that people can engage. So That's that piece. Gary, you can leave your hand up if you'd like us to speak to you specifically, and put it down if that answers your question.
Okay, it looks like Gary put his hand down. So Gary, if you have more to say, we are going to have a public comment section before our break. So I invite you to write it down, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I want to say that, Gary, I would love to hear from you, and I would love to have you be a part of this in any way that you can.
Yeah, ditto. Likewise. Thanks for.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too.
Great.
Me too.
You guys are great.
Can I move on to the second part of that agenda item?
Sure.
We were talking about, Emily and I were, you know, as facilitators, we're doing a lot of legwork outside of these meetings to, in this phase, craft very specifically what we're going to be doing. And in the very next phase, starting ASAP this week, after this meeting, we're going to be doing the work of inquiry and information gathering in the community. And we wanted to just check in about a couple of points that came up that are sort of larger points that don't fit elsewhere, that we wanted to sort of ground and center in as we move through this meeting. And I'll keep it brief. But one of those points of interest that I've had in the last few meetings is just in conceiving of how we're kind of conducting ourselves together in this process, and the balance between sort of, how do I want to say it? I'm gonna start over. We want this process to be, as Emily said earlier, really whole. It's important, as is evident in this very meeting, that we are able to be with the human realities of these really hard topics that we're talking about. And as we go forward into the larger community and are engaging with people about these things that are really close to our hearts, we want to really make sure that we are coming from a place of acknowledging that wholeness and being focused on being in right relationship with each other, and less focused on a scientific interrogation, inquisition mindset. And nobody has suggested that. That's not a critique of anyone. I just want to name that into the space ever. You know what I mean? That we really want to be asking people open questions and leaving space in those conversations for them to be somewhat organic and respectful and reverent of people's lived experiences. And we're not going to be, we want to ask questions, but we don't want to be questioning someone who has to prove their experience in any way. This is just a, story gathering experience, largely from our community. And we're going to be taking the sort of like larger aggregate of these themes that we're seeing and the needs that we're hearing expressed and putting those together into a report. But I don't want us to get too glued as we move through this very agenda in like an extremely scientific kind of control variable mindset around the way that we're going to be asking into these ideas, because it's, as I imagine myself holding a lot of one-on-one interviews, that makes a lot less sense than us focusing really on the essential questions of what we want to ask and allowing people to have the space to be in a real conversation. Also, we've gotten some questions from the community in our email about how we're defining safety in this experience, and that is exactly related to what I just said, which is that we are not going to tell someone what safety means for them. That, I don't feel comfortable doing that. I have my own set of life experiences and privileges and harms that I've been through, and I define safety in the way that I do, but I'm not going to tell another person what exactly safety means to them. And I think that this inquiry leaves space for people to name that. Does homelessness contribute to someone's conception of unsafety? How does crisis response contribute? How does poverty contribute? We're just going to be asking into some more essential questions and leaving space for what people have to share about what safety means to them, and what danger and harm mean to them, and what good support and community care means to them. So I'm not going to prescribe that to anybody myself. We wanted to name to you all that we really want to welcome discussion and discourse and realness and truth and disagreement into this space, acknowledging that it's going to be hard topics sometimes and that we do hold some power as facilitators. We are going to be doing at least approximately 10 hours of labor outside of our meetings per week on the process, and we are going to be responsible for producing that report at the end. We're going to be handing our work back to you all and getting sort of approval about it and sort of going back and doing a lot of work, and we're going to hold a lot of responsibility and some leadership in that. But also we want to make sure that we're constantly inviting disagreement and discussion and discourse and realness, so that we're acknowledging that power differential and that responsibility differential. And if we're not inviting that, I don't want you all to feel like you're not able to step up with the real feelings. And so far, you all, I think, are doing a great job of that. I feel like really grateful for the way that the committee is showing up so far and naming the truth, that your own truths. So that's just the sort of tonal check-in points that I wanted to make before we get into, updating about the review and the type of questions we want to be asking and really hammering out a schedule. And then after this meeting, my hope is that Emily and I will be freed by our agreements in this meeting to really get out of the gates running or whatever and bang-a-rang and schedule a lot of inquiry with the community. I'm ready for that work to begin. So that's my piece of that topic. Does anyone have anything they want to share? Emily can facilitate your hand raising, or you can just popcorn it in.
Go for it, Darlene.
I just wanted to let people know that the other day I was at the grocery store, and I happened to walk by this lady, and she had a sweatshirt on, and on the sweatshirt it said BBC TV. So I asked her if she worked for the BBC TV, and she said yes. She said that she knows that the select board is working on something with the community, and I said yes, I'm part of the select board doing that community safety thing. And she said if we would like it filmed or anything, that they would be willing to help us. And she gave me a phone number for us to reach out to them.
I can give an update about that,
Yeah.
Darlene, if you'd like one. We've reached out to BCTV, and they said that they're happy to stream our meeting or upload our meetings right after they happen. And if we want to stream them live, it's a little bit more complicated of a process. But Emily and I are going to send them the meetings we've already had so that they can upload them and stream them on the internet, put them online. And that's already in the works.
Thanks, Darlene.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Shay. Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple comments to what you're saying too, Shay, to two things. In trauma work, it's, I think, super important and central that the person is the expert on their experience, and that trauma and the trauma impacts all of us. And when we're talking about safety, danger, and harm, we're very often talking about trauma. And to sort of back up what you're saying, Shay, I think that as we do this in a different way, which is like pretty significantly a big part of how we've been moving forward with this process, that we are acknowledging that we are engaging with the community in a more trauma-informed way than many different inquiry systems are used to sort of integrating into those processes, right? And so believing people's stories is critical. and centering their experiences and their stories and their, you know, how their experiences impacted them, right? And in a lot of ways, when we talk about safety, we're talking about a sense of safety. We're talking about a subjective experience of safe, which is a really complicated thing to get into. And so we're not sort of bringing that to the table. That's actually what we're inviting to the table. And in order for the information gathering process to feel safe-ish, which is actually a word I use instead of safe, we are attuning to the qualities that help people feel safer. And that includes centering people's own truth and their own experience. So we're going to be today and in the next few weeks, we're going to be sort of determining where we want to, what information we want to gather and how we even start to ask these questions. And so that we have a place to start from. And then we need there to be spaciousness enough for people to be able to say their story, right? And the questions are too specific or too predetermined, then some people's stories are likely to be left out.
I want to just make a question in the honoring of time. Where are we in the agenda? Are we on item number 4 right now? Item 5, identifying collaborators?
We're on 3.
That's what I thought. Yeah, so we're a little behind. So just
Significantly behind. Thank you.
Thanks, Lana.
You're welcome.
Which brings up the piece around reviewing minutes in terms of how we want to move forward with that.
Does anybody have any comments about the minutes that were shared? I think that would probably be the fastest way to move forward, is just if you have any corrections. And otherwise, we should just vote to approve them if nobody has corrections.
I vote to approve them.
Mm-hmm. Woo! Is that a motion, Lana?
I'm sorry, you can't see me, but I'm snapping.
Anyone want to second it?
I'll second it.
I was gonna.
You sound like we got a third then.
Great, thank you. All righty, so a very brief update on the Brattleboro Police Department review. I graciously received a thumb drive full of content from Captain Kerrigan, and we'll be leafing through that immediately. And I also have, Shay and I will be meeting via Zoom with Chief Fitzgerald and Captain Kerrigan on Friday. So that sort of initiates the review process. And later on in tonight's agenda, if anybody is interested in anybody in the committee is interested in participating in the review, doing like the lit review of the content that was requested and helping to gather information from that review, that is a task, a committee task outside of the committee meetings that is available if folks want to be involved in that. So at the end of this meeting, we'll be determining who wants to participate in what tasks outside of the committee meetings. So we'll just bookmark that. But I'm letting you know that we have the first round of content that we've asked for, and we'll begin reviewing it immediately. Yeah.
Thanks.
And at a later meeting, I will talk a little bit more about quality review and what the BPD review and the systems review side of this can bring to the table. But I think for now, because we're just getting it started and we have so much on our agenda to get to, we're going to table that for a later meeting. But I do want to have some dialogue about that side of this process. We have just some time-sensitive items. So one of our, skating right on through to number 5, agenda item 5, identifying collaborators. One of our deliverables is an ecosystems map, a community safety systems ecosystems map, which is essentially a way that we've defined something that will show the current model in Brattleboro, what Brattleboro has, and to some degree, what sort of categorically what those services are meant to provide to the community. And so I have taken a first run at this. It's very, very draft. It's essentially at this point just a list of organizations. And
Can I say one thing before we go on, Emily?
Yeah.
I think the first draft that we have is exactly as you described. It's showing the system as it is. The last draft that's a deliverable will not only show what is and how that works, but also I think it will have space in it to show gaps and possibilities for what else is next as well. I just want to add that in there super briefly. Carry on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So this is where we're starting. It's a draft of, it's really just a starting place. I don't expect the final draft to look anything like this. And I'm not committed to any of the language at all. But it's a place for us to start from, dialogue from, and then as Shay's also saying, we will decide what it is we need and want the map to show, not just the organizations themselves and what they do, or categories of system categories, but also, yeah, gaps and needs. I'm actually going to pause myself and say there's a few comments in the chat I would like to name. First is that Gary says that he would be honored. I just need to find the exact comment. Gary says, it would be my honor. This was from earlier when we said we'd love him to be involved. Also, Darlene sent me a private message that she said she would like me to read earlier on. It's a little, so she wanted to share that a friend of hers was abused by her boyfriend this weekend, and the cops kicked her door in and woke her babies up in the middle of the night and put her best friend and her boyfriend in handcuffs, and they were very rude. So Darlene wanted me to share an experience that she had as well. Thank you for sharing, Darlene. Okay.
I want to thank Darlene and Kelsey for naming how relevant and important this work is in this moment right now.
Thank you.
And also, as a note about sharing experiences, I think I want to really name that sharing our own experiences is very important. Mm-hmm. And sharing any identifiable experiences of other people is not going to be this isn't going to be a great space for that, mm-hmm. because it's so public. So yeah. As long as we can keep our experiences to, I experienced this in this way without naming any identifiers, I really want to welcome that. But as soon as it gets to be identifiable, that's sort of outing somebody else's experience into a very large space. So let's just keep that in mind as we ride these lines, these tough lines together of holding all of the big reality of this.
Thank you, Shay. And a little later in the agenda today, we'll talk a little more also about de-identification, which is relevant to that. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to share my screen, and I recognize that when I share my screen, the ASL interpreters kind of go away. Everyone's little screens go away unless you pin it to such. So if, make sure that you're pinning a video if you need to see one of the videos. Okay, so this is the first draft of an ecosystems map, and we're going to start with a brief exercise. Okay, here we go. Can I get rid of this ruler? We're going to start with a brief exercise to start to think about how we might want to engage these organizations, okay? So again, these categories on the left-hand side, these are, we are not committed to necessarily, they're just a starting point. And then we have some organizations or entities in the community that serve the community that, that fall under these categories. I don't believe this list is comprehensive. Another thing that's important to name is that this is a list, and many of these organizations actually fit into multiple categories, both listed here and not listed. And so, I imagine that a more final draft of this wouldn't necessarily be a list. But the first thing I want to do is make sure that we have this great committee that has a lot of perspective. And the first thing I'd like y'all to do is just take a quick look at this list and see if there's anyone that off the top of your head you can tell is left out. and we can add them in. And because I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see who, and I'm going to pin the PSL interpreter, which somehow didn't work, Janet. So if you would like to say something, please just go ahead and unmute. There we go.
Is it possible to make it slightly larger?
Yes. But then it does some stuff. So for folks on the phone too, I will just briefly read through. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna switch over to a different version of this, because what we are going to do next is determine who on this list we want to do a listening session with or one-on-ones with, and who from the organization we might consider engaging with. So this, I think, would be a better format to even also just talk about if we're missing anybody, and easier to read from. Okay, so I think the quickest way, okay, Vermont, Gary is chiming in via chat. Vermont State Housing Authority Section 8 should be added. Okay, so thank you, Gary. So what I think we should do is go through, and again, as we realize something is missing, please feel free to chime in. And we can then discuss how we want to engage the folks served from these organizations. Now, many people were not, like, for example, the Brattleboro Police, we're going to gauge that through public forum, right? We're going to engage people's experiences with the Brattleboro Police through public forum, because we're not going to necessarily be able to access individuals served by the police through a listening session or a one-on-one with the police, right? And Laura Stamma says a tub is missing from housing. Thank you. I will add these for sure. The one-on-one option, then we're also going to sort of determine which of these do we want to engage folks in through a listening session, which of these do we want to engage folks through one-on-one, and who might we engage? Oh my gosh. Who might we engage through these organizations? Does this make sense? Do folks have questions about this activity? And we can dialogue too about, we wanted to make this kind of quick because we have a couple
not really
of more
we're like
steps in.
We're super behind. So I think there's not a lot of space for dialogue in this section. There's space for dialogue in the other agenda items that are attached. But if we can use this as a warm-up and just kind of like quickly do this part, I think it's really going to help. We have about 20 minutes of content that's not going to get covered if we don't push through.
Yes. Okay. So
just real quick, does the Guardian Ad Litem program fall under one of these, or is that a separate thing that should be included?
it's a great question. Yeah, we can include that. It's not, I don't think it's here.
I believe that that's part of DCF, but that could have its own.
Yeah, I was going to say that Guardian Ad Litems often intersect with DCF, and so it might be a little redundant. I mean, they do play a different role, but it's all kind of part of the same system.
Yeah.
So many of these entities will be talking with multiple people, and that's going to be collected in this activity. So that's great information.
Maya, will you put that? Did you say the Guardian Ad Litems?
Yeah, just that I believe it's part of DCF.
Okay. Whoever, would you put that in the chat? Because I'm not going to have the time to add it into the document right now, but using the chat for this has been really helpful. Great, thank you. Okay, so let's cruise through here. So for example, Brattleboro Police, we're not going to do a listening session or one-on-ones because we're going to do public forums, right, and engage the public for that. It's possible that by reviewing records, we could reach out to people served by the Brattleboro Police about their experiences. But for now, I think for the purpose of this activity, we want to cruise through and see if a one-on-one or a listening session would be an appropriate format to try to schedule in, right? By engaging these organizations, by scheduling in listening sessions or one-on-one. And this is going back to from our last meeting when we talked about the 4 different ways we'll engage folks, right? And the public forum being one and the anonymous testimony being another. And those 2 are going to essentially be like really community-wide, right? The listening sessions will be more focused on targeted, communities of people, and the one-on-ones are another strategy for that. Make sense? Okay. So dispatch, probably similar to the police in that we're not going to be engaging them directly, and they're those served directly. DCF.
I would say similar to the police if I was going to throw something out. I'm wondering, are we supposed to be weighing in on this right now, or is this just something we're pocketing and thinking about?
We want you to weigh on it right now, because what we'd like to have by the end of our meeting is Shay and I would like to be able to start scheduling these listening sessions, because we only have 6 to 8 weeks left to be able to actually do the public forums, the listening sessions, the one-on-one, and the anonymous testimony. We need to start scheduling the listening sessions, and the listening sessions and one-on-ones. These are the sort of, because these are the organizations that we're collaborating with and that serve the community in the ways that we're trying to understand better, these seem to be the places to start kind of scheduling these listening session and one-on-one through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, should we go through and just yay or nay, like listening session, not like clean popcorn it or something?
Yeah, let's go through.
So I think not only are we going to go through, my hope for this, I just want to say, was that we could go through real quick and just say whether or not that was a valuable use of time to schedule a listening session, or if we'd rather do one-on-ones with specific people. And who to engage with means, does anybody have ideas about like a contact person there real quick to just throw in? If we don't, that's totally fine. And then just bang, bang, bang through. However, I also want to say that we only have maybe 8 total weeks to work with for the listening sessions. And I don't know how many of those you all expect us to facilitate, but for me that means that there's only a limited amount of those that's available. So we really need to be thinking about those somewhat judiciously regarding time. So if we do a listening session for every single place, we're just not going to get that done. So we need to just,
but prioritize.
10 or 12 or
if I could throw it out there. I mean, for me, this is just coming from myself, obviously, listening sessions to the most marginalized group. So, battered women, LGBTQ, the BIPOC, that to me seems like the listening sessions where and you could get enough people together. So I just want to throw it out there.
Yep.
Can I just quickly, sorry if this was already said, but what's the difference between a listening session and a one-on-one interview?
So a listening session is like a forum, like a group of people, and a one-on-one is a one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a listening session is a larger task to plan.
Right. So for example, the Root Social Justice Center has a group called Families United, which is a group of families who are impacted by DCF intervention. And I think, for example, if folks feel comfortable, it's a strong word, but if there's consent, I think a listening session would be a great place to gather information about those impacted by DCF intervention, right? Groundworks Collaborative, I think, would be another great place to do a listening session, because there's folks there, folks living with homelessness and folks who are experiencing poverty and folks who are experiencing police intervention adjacent to those experiences. And so already having, serving that population in groups, we can potentially engage Groundworks to do a listening session with folks served by Groundworks.
I personally think that anyone who isn't like like DCF, those should be those can be quick one-on-ones, right? I mean, if they are an extension of the police, then it's not the same kind of listening session, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
for
one-on-ones you're saying.
For most of the people who are like service providers, we're going to be doing one-on-ones.
Perfect.
That's
Right.
for the people who are actually working inside of the system. We're not going to be roundtabling with those folks. We're going to be reaching out to specific contacts and just talking to them on the phone. Mostly me, probably a lot. This would be a great space to name, not only the groups of marginalized people that we might want to do listening sessions with, but also some of these organizations. We might host listening sessions with the people that they are tasked to support. Do we want to, ask the Women's Freedom Center or some other groups, Pathways or Groundworks, if we want to do a listening session with people that they support? Is different than like a listening session with the employees of Groundworks or whatever. If that helps clear.
Right. Okay, so let's look at this further. I'm trying to make it so that we can see the whole thing in one screen. Bob, you raised your hand?
Yes. I guess I'm a little confused. I think I understand the purpose of having listening sessions with folks who are impacted. I think that's pretty clear. When you're reaching out to organizations, particularly large organizations, DCF, and I put DCF again in the chat, but that may have been a mistake because you already have it listed. What kind of information or what kind of feedback are you trying to get from those organizations? Is that reach out significantly different than the way you would reach out to someone who is impacted? So that's my sort of general philosophical question.
Right.
And we have space for that in the agenda in the information gathering tool question design, which is coming right up if we have time for it. But I'm pretty eager to get to that part of the agenda soon. And they will be different kinds of questions for the police versus people who experience policing.
I
Is that what you're saying?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Let's pause on that question. Let's park it for the next agenda item because it's a great question for that piece.
So then let me add this. I think that from, I did put in the chat Vermont Judiciary, and they have a big piece of the puzzle, I think, in this area, but it's not an organization that you're probably going to be able to connect with easily. But I think it's important that you list the judiciary. I also, and maybe this question is for later, I did have a reach out with a couple of different organizations that should be on your list, and that would be the NAACP and No Polimid, and also COSU, which is the consortium on some. So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to overcomplicate this when we're trying to move on, but I guess I'm confused, like how we would be doing outreach to the clients of certain agencies, and also the point that like many people are impacted by multiple of these at once or throughout their lives. So I guess I'm curious why we would be reaching out like specifically for like a DCF client's listening session, and also like I don't know that we could get that information.
Right. So let's scale back a little bit and just sort of revisit the scope of what it is that we're doing here, right? So for the community experiences data piece of this work, we're going to be gathering information in these 4 ways that we've determined, right? The public forum and the anonymous survey will be the way we're going to capture information from the larger community, right? But we don't want to just stop there. We want to also be able to engage people who are already engaged, through these collaborative organizations. So a big part of collaborating with these organizations is to engage with folks who work at these organizations to be able to facilitate and hold space for listening sessions to be able to gather information about safety, danger, and harm in Brattleboro from people who we know are already engaged through services that are part of the system of community safety, right? And so, for example, with the retreat, you know, there's individuals that work at the retreat that might be able to help us facilitate and schedule and then invite people who are interested in sharing their experience to a listening session, right? That maybe don't want to come to a public forum because it's too public, right? But the listening session will be de-identified. And so the purpose of this activity is to say, these are the collaborative organizations we have to potentially work with. And if we can connect with somebody at the retreat, for example, and hold a listening session there, we're going to be able to engage more people. And it has other impacts. I think you all talked last time about like the benefits versus the risks of certain of these sessions. So listening sessions are more targeted and more private than the public forums, but still get a bunch of different perspectives at the same time.
Can I just
ask? And to make it more specific and less scaled out, I don't think that we're going to have time to do everything on our agenda. But I just want to say that the concern that you just named, the space for that in this document is no, it would not be appropriate for a listening session for DCF clients, potentially. Right. That's the point of this activity, is just to go through and just name those things as we're doing it.
Right.
And so Brattleboro Police, no, we're not going to have a listening session with everyone who's ever been engaged with the police. There's not a way to organize that. We maybe will use a public forum for that and do one-on-one interviews with specific people if you guys name that you think that. You know, blah, 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 no, we aren't going to do a listening session for all these places because it might not be appropriate. And yes, we might do a listening session for, maybe as Lana suggested, some of the specific organizations that support or work with marginalized people or people who are particularly impacted by policing. So how would we deal with those kind of questions about organizations like DCF is precisely just mark no in the listening session box. Would be my feedback about how to deal with that kind of conflict.
Can I just quickly chime in a little thought about the DCF piece, because I'm pretty tapped into that, is that two things when you're looking to connect with, you know, point people in that organization that work within that system, I definitely recommend that you meet with both front end investigator, supervisor, and ongoing, because it's sort of different work flows together, but families have a lot to say about both parts of that process. And also I know there's quite a lot, there's like a whole community on Facebook. I've never looked at it, but I hear about it all the time from the families I work with, of folks getting on Facebook and sharing their stories and woes about their situation. So I wonder about when we advertise the public forums, whether we could name some of these things of like, just throwing it out there, people that we don't want to invite sort of slander fest either, but like name some of those pieces of inviting people that might want to share publicly kind of ideas of what we're talking about rather than making it really, I don't know, really general, but that might just be a way to get people to speak up.
Yeah, great. And we're going to talk a little more about that if we get to it, in number 7. So I have an idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it, thank you, Kelsey, for those thoughts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so you can see this section, and folks who are able to see, you can see I've put an X in the listening session box for the ones we've said already that we want to engage. So if there's anything you see here that you want to do a listening session with, just name it. That's all we're doing right in this moment, is naming, we should do a listening session with this group, you know, that you can see. And then in a couple moments, I'm going to move it down to the next frame. So, because there's more. And then the ones that y'all chatted in, I will then add into this list. Okay. And does that make sense? So anything here that folks that doesn't have an X that you want to say should have an X.
Maybe I'm not looking at the right thing. Is this your screen where you're talking about the X?
Yeah, do you see are y'all able to see the list of collaborative organizations, the listening session, the one-on-one?
No, it says on the left, it's got crisis responders, housing support.
Sorry, I'm gonna reshare it.
Okay.
I don't know, sorry. Okay, it's crisis responders, housing support.
Okay, yes, now that makes
sense. Is this a different screen?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I was wondering if it was just, I was like, what the heck is
I
she
am so
talking
sorry.
about?
I was looking at, I thought, I'm sorry. Okay, so do you
I was
see?
confused too, so.
Thank you so much for pausing me. So there's a list of organizations on the left hand,
Mhm.
and then I've put an X where we've already essentially said we want a listening session to happen.
So the Vermont Psychiatric Survivors, that might be an interesting one
Yes.
to do a listening session with, if you guys.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
And then there was the, where was the Women's Freedom Center?
Yep, I put an X there.
Okay, great.
Darlene, what do you think about Wyndham and Windsor and the Great River Terrace project potentially?
Yes, I think we should.
And what about, oh, you did out in the open already. Good job.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Groundworks, oh, that's awesome. Okay, great.
All right, I'm going to scroll down. I'm so sorry this wasn't being seen.
And perhaps I'm confused as to how this works. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Phoenix House.
I mean, it might be a little difficult, but I'm wondering whether a listening session with dispatch might not be a bad idea.
Well, we are going to do listening sessions with the police officers. And we can talk about whether or not it makes sense to do that with dispatch. I think it's a good idea. As Shay said, you know, we could put X's next to all of these. We could do listening sessions with everybody, but as is evidenced by their experience in this meeting, we have a pretty short time frame to get through this whole process. So I think our goal here is to prioritize where we want to hold these listening sessions, and to stay realistic about how many we can do.
And to acknowledge that there are people, if somebody works inside of a system, it's going to be really easy for us to get names of the key people that we need to talk to and do as many one-on-one interviews and conversations in that context as necessary.
Right.
I could talk to every single dispatcher,
Right.
and that would be a lot easier than organizing 20 listening sessions, you know what I mean? So that's where that prioritization is going to come in.
Yeah, good point.
Can I just ask a question? I'm just trying to figure out what the difference is of the Department of Mental Health to HCRS.
Yeah, so they are different. HCRS is a private nonprofit entity, and they are funded by, in large part, through the Department of Mental Health. And Department of Mental Health is the overseer. But I think, to your point, I think it would be more effective to do a listening session with HCRS than the Department of Mental Health.
With
Yeah, I
HCRS
agree.
service users, to be clear.
Yeah. And I'm going to put Malika Puffer, the peer support coordinator, director, as the contact there.
And maybe the adult services director and some of the other managers might be helpful as one-on-one folks.
Yep.
But Malika would be a great person to coordinate the
listening
people who
sessions.
use HCRS supports listening sessions.
I just wanted to quickly suggest that Vermont Psychiatric Survivors might be a better one to do than the retreat, because the retreat is just enormous, and
Right.
I can't even conceptualize who would show up to that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Chris was the person who suggested we do one with the retreat, and
Right.
I believe they work there, and so we might be able to check in with them about what their
Right.
dreams were for that. But
Right.
I agree that it's an unwieldy prospect.
Yeah. And it might be a collaboration. I know the Psych Survivors group works closely, visits the retreat often. So I think the governmental pieces are just too big and they're kind of like the police in the sense that we're not going to get through to listening sessions from those doors, you know. But this is our final little page here. So I'm going to see if anybody wants to put an X,
I
to do a
do think the
session.
senior center could be a good one to
Yeah.
get that population's perspective.
Great point. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I also think the Brattleboro Hospice and the Restorative Justice Group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Turning Point, probably. Youth services, maybe?
and probation and parole.
Annalise, what about Community Justice Center, do you think?
Yeah, there are a few different places I think that Mel could connect us with. I know that she does the circle. She has a couple of different circles in the community, which I'm not going to name because I'm not sure about the levels of confidentiality.
Right.
But she's tapped into a few different things that I think she's definitely someone we should talk to about doing some listening sessions.
Great, thank you. And probably the Inclusion Center. Definitely the Vermont Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And blind and visually impaired. Recognizing that people living with disabilities are some of the more vulnerable folks to police violence.
Yes, and I think we should talk with Vermont Center for Independent Living.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So we have a lot of X's. Again, to our point earlier, we're not sure that we're going to be able to necessarily, do a listening session with all of these folks, but we can certainly acknowledge, we have somewhere to start now. And that way Shay and I can start connecting with those individuals or those groups and, see if folks are up for collaborating in this way and scheduling listening sessions. And because of the time, I'm going to ask any community members who have thoughts on this particular piece just to put it in the chat for now. If there's an organization that was missing, someone you think should be engaged, please go ahead and add it to the chat. That way I can keep a record of that and add it to the list afterwards.
I think we might need to read out loud if that's, we might need to read those out loud, Emily, and also if you're by phone and you have an organization that has not yet been named, speak it out now.
All right, I am going to read these. Okay. HUD home buying, Gary says. Maya says Sevka. I'm not sure whether the same as state housing. Gary says Sevka is separate opportunity. Laura is also putting it in the notes. Maya says guardian ad litem program related to DCF, but a different perspective. Bob says consider adding Vermont Judiciary, DCF, NAACP, COSU, no Polmigra. Darlene says she agrees with Bob. Kelsey says it may overcomplicate the process beyond what we can tackle, but Vermont State Police responds to calls in Brattleboro surrounding towns. Offenders and victims are then supervised and policed by Vermont PD and PNP. Lana says she's lost from a timekeeping standpoint. We are very off schedule, totally. Darlene says she's also lost. Bob says perhaps Jeff Kane at the retreat. Gary says you definitely want Mel Motel. Darlene says yes, Gary, we do. She's amazing. Emily says yes, she is. Kelsey says Katie Sell, Knapp, Windham County SA Victims Advocate. So that's where we are. And we will add those into the notes and I will add them into the document as well. Okay. And yes, we are very off of our time. We also knew it was a very ambitious agenda. So I'm grateful for all of the ideas. Well, I think we should do a quick sort of reorientation of the rest of our 20 minutes. So what we had left is a 5-minute break, and then to start talking big picture brainstorming about what kinds of questions we want to ask, what kinds of information we want to be gathering, and then to get more specific about how many public forums and how we're going to advertise and engage people in the community in both the public forums and the anonymous testimony. So I'm open for thoughts about where we want to go. Our hope for outcomes from this meeting, what we wanted to achieve by the end of this meeting, was Shay and I wanted to be able to start scheduling these listening sessions with these organizations that I feel like we have a starting point for that and we're able to do that now. Also start scheduling public forums and potentially start the engagement process, and then have a direction of where we want to go with what we want to ask so that Shay and I can put together some more specific questions that then we can kick back to the committee at our next meeting and work out.
My question is, can any of this happen through email?
Well, Emily and I can do a lot through email, but you all can't do very much through email. And that is, not collectively anyway. The committee, I guess, can empower smaller groups to do things that aren't really decisional, to do some work outside of the larger group and to come back and bring that to the larger group for transparency and public discussion and accountability. And I would say, you know, I'm looking at the agenda and I think I don't know, I feel like I have been putting off some of these topics until this meeting already in order to make space for the grounding into the process that we needed to do. I think it will be really hard if we don't get our questions, some agreement, either if we don't collectively agree about what our questions are going to be like in this meeting, or if you don't empower Emily and I to just make that decision. Because every day that goes on without us having some agreement about that is a day that I can't be spending time doing the actual work of calling people and talking to community members. And I'm rip-roaring ready to go and do that. And I feel like there's just a horse behind the gate right before the race. I'm waiting.
Can we go ahead and
so that part is pretty important to me, I feel like, to get done in this space. Maybe some of the parts about how to sort of advertise public forums might be able to happen next week. Maybe a check-in care plan stuff could happen later or differently. And I think that definitely people signing up for tasks could probably happen by you all just emailing Emily and I.
Yeah, I think all of agenda item 8 we'll do by email. And to be transparent with the public, what that means is that individual community members who want to participate just simply in information gathering tasks, not in decisional tasks, that will happen outside of the committee meetings, we will send you a list, or maybe even just make a survey, and you and the committee you'll sign up for, like, we'll explain it, and you'll sign up for essentially what, if any, tasks outside of the committee you want to be a part of. Okay. And I agree with you, Shay, that we can get more specific about the outreach and the engagement and advertising in our next meeting. I'm going to recommend that instead of taking a group break, that anyone who needs to take a break, turn off their camera and take a break whenever you need to. But that way we can keep momentum moving. Are folks okay with that? And please know that breaks are very, very encouraged. So I'm not saying don't take a break. I'm just saying listen to your own body instead of me as to when to take a break. Great. Okay. Shay, is that cool with you?
Yeah. I think that means that people might not be present for collective conversation that needs to be collective, but I think it's okay with me if the group agrees.
Yeah. The other option is we can go ahead and take a few minutes right now, and then come back and get ready to.
This would be a great opportunity for the committee to use thumbs to tell you what they want, I think.
Ooh.
I say we power through. That's my vote.
Okay. We're getting some up thumbs, some thumb ups.
Great.
Great. Okay. So we're going to move on to the question design piece, right? And we'll spend 15 to 20 minutes here, maybe a little bit less given our time constraints, right? And how we're going to do this is Shay is going to kind of walk us through how we're going to do this while I get us into a screen share of a brainstorming, and I'm going to be writing what you're saying as essentially note-taking as we do this. So Laura, you can I'll write everything that's brainstormed down, and then we can just add that to the notes. Okay.
Emily, will you check the waiting room to make sure there's nobody there that needs to get in?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Darlene just rejoined us.
Beautiful. So in this question design piece, we're going to do it really briefly. It can be the beginning brainstorm. You guys can send us more ideas, I think, over email, and we're not going to finalize it probably until next week. But generally, there's going to be two veins of questions that we're going to be asking folks. One is, what is the most essential information that we want to get from people who have been impacted by these systems, particularly by policing and extensions of policing, places where the state can sort of take power over somebody's experience, but also other systems. What are the most essential questions that we have toward our sort of end goal of getting clear information about what are the things that are supporting safety and wellness and thriving in our community, and what are things that are still leaving people exposed to danger, causing additional danger and harm, and that will inform us making recommendations about the budget, about continued work that needs to happen, and about who and how we want to be giving, suggesting more resources go to or less resources go to in envisioning a safer community for all. There's questions for the people who have experienced systems and experienced danger and safety concerns in this community. And then there's a separate set of questions that we're going to be asking to people who work inside of those systems. We're not going to be asking the police the exact same questions as we're going to be asking survivors, as an example. And I want to make sure that we remember that very first agenda item super briefly, that we're not going to be locked into only rigidly asking these questions in a conversation with people. We're going to really be attuning into those conversations and having a more organic conversation. I'm not going to call up somebody from the root and just interrogate them with a list. That would be disrespectful, and I have no interest in doing that. I would rather have some essential information that you all and we agree on, that we're looking for, and to use that as a springboard to have that conversation. So what we want to do in this next just 10 minutes or so is spend maybe 5 minutes just brainstorming what are the essential questions for people who have experienced these systems, and what are the 5 minutes on what are the essential questions for people who are inside of these systems. That's our assignment.
And just
so I think we can just hop off. I can't really see you all, but Emily's going to take notes, and I think we should focus first on the people who experience these systems and are most impacted. What are the most essential things we need to ask them?
So I'm going to do this, Shay. You've said a lot, and in what you said, you've sort of, I wrote down 3 questions, and I think we should kind of go through them one by one. So what is the most information we want to get about/from? And I want to change this because want to get feels extractive. I wrote that. So the most essential information we, even just changing this to gather feels better, about, from people who have been most impacted by these systems. And then you asked about what are the things that are supporting safety, wellness, and thriving, and what are the things that are leaving folks exposed to, causing danger and harm. So I'm going to put these on the 3 separate slides that I have here. And then we'll go one by one. So the first thing is, what is the most essential information we want to gather from people who have been most impacted by these systems? And y'all can just sort of popcorn style, brainstorm style. What are some, we don't want to get too into the crafting of the language. You don't have to worry right now about crafting the sentence or the question, but
no, this is just a quick brainstorm. We just got to start the ideas flowing immediately.
So one thing that comes to my mind is, was a complaint made, and then what happened as a result of the complaint? Was there any follow-up to the complaint?
Can you say what you mean by do you mean to the police a complaint?
Yeah, I mean, was there a public complaint or a formal complaint lodged after said incident, if there was an incident? I mean, backtracking before that would be, have you had an altercation? What was the altercation?
What was the system's response
exactly
to knowledge that something went wrong?
Exactly.
Great.
So I think a lot about just trying to elicit feedback about what the experience is actually working with, trying to access help or potentially being held, experiencing the consequences of being in the system, right? And so we're really looking for people to speak to that, not just about what we read about on paper. This is the system that you engage with in these circumstances, but what is that really like? Because there are major gaps in what we think people will access when they need help, or what we think people will experience when they're being held accountable for whatever behavioral or alleged behavioral issues there are. So I'm just talking out loud, but just like trying to elicit that information of what is the actual experience? What did you actually experience when you sought help or when you were arrested? And rather than locking in, sort of suggesting it was necessarily negative, but keeping it open.
Yeah, so going on what you're saying, Kelsey, what I think is interesting, like thinking about, so if you live on Elliott Street, for instance, your daily interactions with police are one thing, but if you live on Upper Forest, you barely have any. So, one simple question is like, what are your daily interactions like with the police? Or do you interact with the police on a daily basis? Because that looks extremely difficult for different neighborhoods.
Yep.
I think there's a question here too of like, if you called for help for whatever it is, what was the difference between what your hope for that experience was and what actually happened in that experience? And what were the things you wish would have been different?
Yeah,
say that one more time, Annalise.
If you called for help of any kind, what were you hoping to get out of that, and what actually happened, and what were the things, both good and bad, that were different than what you anticipated?
Thanks.
I agree with Annalise.
Yeah. And also, just to go off of that, what would have been most supportive to you when you were going through that experience? What would have supported you best? Was that something that exists? Was that something else?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but something that kind of gets at like what were the strengths or like what are the strengths that you see in our community safety network, and like are there any particular opportunities that you see for something that exists to be strengthened? Something like that.
So that maybe kind of brings us into our next question, Maya. What are the things that are supporting safety, wellness, and thriving? And then this last question, what are the things that are leaving folks exposed to causing danger and harm? And I think this is a great starting point here that we've gotten with this first question. Any last thoughts on this first question? What is the most essential information we want to gather from people who have been most impacted by these systems?
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry.
No, go ahead, Darlene.
I was just going to say, as part of that, did anybody have any support while they were going through what they were going through, and what kind of support did you have?
Thank you. Yep. Annalise?
I was going to say, this is sort of a corollary to what I said before, or the flip side, like, did you need help and you didn't call for it because you were afraid of consequences of that help?
That's a really great one.
Or did you not need help, and quote unquote help came anyway, which is another flip side of the same coin, quote unquote.
Those are both really helpful things, because I think we're going to hear a lot of stories of I called for help, but I had a negative experience, therefore I didn't call for help going forward. And also the flip side. So that's great.
Awesome. All righty. Thank you all. This is great. Next one. What things are supported, like questions, again, to gather information around what are the things that are supporting safety, wellness, thriving in our community? How are we gathering that information?
I think that's a good question. Like Darlene kind of hinted on that, saying like, what are your support systems, or where do you turn for support or help?
Yeah, what has been most helpful to you regarding this, whatever your experience or situation or life situation you're naming?
My family.
So I'm wondering about what Lana said, and I've been thinking a lot about this myself, is that I know we want to de-identify as much as possible, but so much of the experience sometimes is dependent upon your race, your gender identification, your socioeconomic status. And so I'm just wondering, like, are we going to have a way to sort of pull that into the testimony while still de-identifying? Because I think that's so important.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one way to do this is to, we could ask people if there are any identities that they want to share about that feel relevant to the experience and how they were treated, or the experience that they had. You know, I don't know if someone has a better way of wording that or other thoughts about that question, but I think rather than obviously any interviewer determining what those links are, asking people directly if they'd like to share recognizing that's going to be a de-identified, they'd like to share anything about their identity or identities that feel related or important to the experiences that they're sharing.
One question, I mean, this might be silly, but it doesn't feel silly to me, so I'll say it anyways. Like, what do you feel when you think of the police? So for instance, my husband and I have very different responses when we see a police officer behind us in a car. My heart starts pounding. I'm hyper aware of every little thing I'm doing. He doesn't even bother to put on his turn signal, which is a law. But so, you know, that what's your somatic response? I mean, that has a lot to do with how you feel about whether you're policed or whether you're protected.
And we could extend that to the police or crisis response or DCF, sort of depending on the specific situation. I think we want to focus on the police and policing, because that's kind of the impetus of this project. But also I want to make space for, if we're talking to folks who've been at the retreat or, you know, or HCRS service users, we want to be asking them what their somatic reaction and experience and sense is about the police, and also about crisis, because they go hand in hand in a lot of cases.
DCF, you know, people need help with accessing resources for parenting, and theoretically that help would come through DCF, but what are people's experiences when they think about contacting DCF or being contacted by DCF?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we need in Brattleboro more of are host families and people to do emergency relief that isn't DCF and that doesn't feel like there's punitive measures.
Right. Can y'all see the chat when I'm looking at it on the share screen? Can you see it up on the share screen? Okay. Good, thank you. Anything else here?
These are great springboard questions, y'all.
I just think asking the kind of category as a question would be really helpful. Like, what supports safety, wellness in our community?
Yeah, or for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that might be, you know, depending on the type of conversation it is, that might be the header. And I think of a lot of these conversations, or a lot of these questions, not as check boxes, but as like seeds or starting points. So if somebody's sharing about their experience with crisis, we're going to just ask into, you know, that what is your felt sense when you think about that? What have your interactions been like? When you wanted help, what were you hoping for, and what did you get? Were they different? What was most supportive? What would have supported you best? We're going to ask it in that context. A lot of those questions, not every single one in a rote way, and we're just going to follow the conversation. If we're talking about the police, we'll ask similar questions to that and follow the conversation and use them as a springboard. And they're really great questions so far.
And we are at time for that particular portion of our agenda.
Yeah.
Great. Great. So do folks want to just throw out a couple of more, do we want to move on, or do folks want to throw out a couple of thoughts on this? What are things that are leaving folks exposed to causing danger and harm? Options for questions here.
I think that some of people's answers got to that. I feel like we could, I think that folks should email us more questions
Yes.
if they think of them, and
Yeah.
we can bring it back we can keep it alive.
Yeah.
But I hear that in
Right.
what is different than, what were you hoping for and what happened? I hear that in what was the quality of your experience like, and were there complaints? And I think there's a little space for me to ask a little bit more into, like, what parts of your situation are the most dangerous? What parts of
Right.
that still feel like they were harmful or are harmful? But that's it, like, just basically like you said, somebody said, I don't actually know who, naming the category as the question might be
Yeah.
where we leave that off for
Right.
now, and we can move on.
I just want to add what has felt like danger, the feeling,
Yeah.
because it's subjective as well. And some of these can be creative prompts. I mean, and folks can can do art and share their response to these in different ways. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And we got some really good questions in there. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And great. Then we are going to move on to this community engagement piece. So it would be nice, and we do have a little bit of time. We do also want to open it up to public comment. We have Laura's phone is in the waiting room, I think. Okay. So we need a few more minutes to open it up to public comment as well. But we want to talk a little bit about, again, the public. We have the public forum piece and the anonymous testimony piece, which is going to need to be essentially a survey that's spread widely that people can access and anonymously answer the questions, and then we'll be able to gather and analyze that data. Does that make sense to folks? So what we want to talk about now is, what do we want to do for public forums? How many do we want to hold? And how do we want to start thinking about holding them and advertising them and engaging the community around that piece of the work?
So then I have a question for the facilitators, because you said we've got 8 weeks, right? And you guys
Right.
will be holding these. So what feels feasible to you? Two a week? One a week?
Right. Well, I think that, Shay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the one-on-ones and the listening sessions, Shay and I and targeted co-facilitators, I'll stop using the word targeted, identified co-facilitators will be doing the bulk of that labor for all of that labor for the one-on-ones and the listening sessions. I think that the development of the questions for all 4 of the types of information gathering, as well as the holding space of the public forums and the writing of the anonymous survey piece, that can be shared by the committee if y'all want to participate in the public forum space holding or events, and we talked about maybe doing some creative things like open mic style or sharing of artistic expression through a Zoom open mic style public forum, and then also more testimony-based or story-based sharing. So those pieces of it, those pieces of the information gathering sections, I think that would be great for y'all to be deeply engaged in and space holders in as well. And so with the listening sessions, I think, as Shay said, we can do a ton of one-on-ones. We can, connect with people. That's easier to schedule because it's one person and one person. The listening sessions are going to be hard to schedule, and we've already gotten a list of where we want to start identifying those groups. And then public forums, how many does the committee want to be involved in, right? How many really public spaces do we want to be holding where people people from Brattleboro can come and share their experiences with any of these systems or experiences?
I think, in part matters sort of how much of a response we get. I think we should be offered as much as possible. The more public sort of testimony in any form we get, I think is going to be, the more the better. But it's also really unknown to me of what sort of response we're going to get. So I wonder whether we could schedule some, and then if there seems to be enough of a response, schedule more. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does one a week feel feasible to you, Emily and Shay?
I don't think so, because in addition to the listening sessions and the one-on-ones and the police review, I think that because once we gather all this data, we're going to then have to be essentially analyzing it. It's a very scientific word, but trying to gather from the information that we get the themes and the gaps and the shared experiences, and So I think because our current plan as a committee is to meet weekly until the end of October, right? One option is that part of the committee process is that we hold public forums some of the weeks instead of committee meetings. You know what I mean? So if y'all decide, you know what, all of November, we're going to do 4 public forums instead of committee meetings, that's something we can do. Or we can, so we can discuss it. I think it's a good starting point. What do others think?
I'm curious if we're going to make any smaller work.
I don't know if you all can hear me. I missed the very.
Hang on a second, Shay. Maya's in the middle of sharing something. Just one moment.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just curious if we were going to be making smaller working groups that are like smaller than the whatever the law is, so that we could continue doing some other things while if we choose to do that.
Yes, there's going to be information gathering assignments, BPD review, doing the ecosystems analysis work, and gathering care planning information for people who might need support after sharing their story or during sharing their story. So there's going to be, and then advertising. So there's going to be tasks, we're calling them tasks, that y'all can engage in outside of the committee meetings, right? But we want to get a sense of how many public forums we want to try to hold throughout the course of this project. Shay, did you want to share?
Yeah, I don't know how well you can hear me. My internet is my is goofy tonight. But my hope, I missed the beginning of this agenda, and I'm so sorry. My hope is that we can do at least one that's creative, be focused. That might be an open mic or some other way that people can like share their experiences that are creative. That's not at all the focus, but just at least one of whatever number we do could be focused in that way. And I agree with Emily that, I think we could do, maybe like weekly listening sessions with different focused groups of people, but weekly public forums on top of that, plus all the other stuff we're doing, sounds quite ambitious to me. We could do them weekly for a month, maybe, or something like that in a limited way, and run a series. That could be cool, but I don't know about like for the entire duration of the project, doing one a week might be quite a lot to manage. That's all.
I keep forgetting we all have day jobs.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, oh, I'm having some audio issues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I was thinking that one creative one and maybe one other public one. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot with the listening sessions on top of it. But again, a lot of it depends on how many people are joining, because I don't think you'd want it to be too big. It could take a really long time. So maybe if there was a ton of participation, like a third one could be scheduled.
We could also cap registration at a certain amount of people. If it's like a Zoom based thing, we could schedule 2, let's say, to start out, and cap registration at a certain amount of people. And then if we get way more people applying to register than that, then we just have to do more. We can't cut off if the people are hungry for the space. We want to give them the space, but I don't want to like host something and not have people show up and then keep doing that for 3 hours a week or whatever. That might be bad.
I hear what you're saying about like we don't know what the response will be. I'm a little hesitant to require like a registration step because for a lot of people, like we're asking them to talk about their trauma. We're asking them, you know, I've given testimony several times at this point. I'm willing to do it, and I'm passionate about doing it, but it takes a certain amount of emotional labor anyway, still, right? And I don't expect that a great number of people that might be willing to do this publicly are necessarily where I am in my process. And so adding another step of like, okay, I'm going to register for this thing, and then I just would rather not create too many barriers if people are willing to put themselves out there.
That's a great point, Kelsey. And if there's too many people in that, by too many, that's not a thing. If there's a ton of people in one listening session that show up, we do have access with our fancy Zoom account to do breakout groups. And so if we can come prepared with having several facilitators from committee members, then we could do them as breakout sessions so that they can become smaller public forums within a mega public forum as a way to manage time.
Emily, I don't know that we can do that if there are many committee members present. We could maybe do that if
Correct.
there's not a quorum. But I think
Correct.
that we actually have to have things be publicly available because of the committee structure.
Yeah, correct.
If it's a committee meeting. And that means that we maybe could have you and me and a paid co-facilitator and 2 committee members or something like that. And that would be 5 groups. And that'd be a lot. But we can't have a committee meeting where there's breakout groups. And a committee meeting is constituted by quorum.
Thanks for correcting me.
Can we speak to the idea of maybe giving up a few of our meetings to do these? Because I thought that was a great idea, Emily. I don't know what everybody else thinks about that.
That is an idea. And we have 5 minutes left of this meeting. We absolutely have to allow for public comment. And I also want to. So what I'm going to recommend at this point is that we go to public comment and that we're going to set up Shay and I will talk more about this, and we will communicate with the committee and offer a few different options, and we'll explore this via email. We've come up with some great ideas in terms of how and the amount of that we do, and then I think that we can get some of this sort of figured out through email. Just we can gather information from you, and then we can confirm it publicly at our next meeting. How does that feel to people?
Can I ask one question before it goes to public comment?
Yep.
How does the committee feel about Emily and I taking some of the listening session X boxes that we've scheduled on our little list and turning that into some phone calls to some places and starting the process of engaging with these community collaborators? You feel like we have enough shared understanding of the questions and the players that we can start the work? I just want to start the work, y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah, start
I
the
think
work.
Darlene gave it the first vote. It's all thumbs, I think. Robert, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm open to dissent. But I would.
Any dissent on that?
Okay, thanks. That's my only question. Let's move on to the public.
Wait,
Robert, do you have
has his
dissent?
hands up.
Yeah.
I was going to make a friendly amendment to that. And
Yeah.
if there are groups or people that all of us know collectively who want to contribute, we can give out the email address for CSRT.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Great. And I will be sending you, there'll be an email about this public forum discussion, just gathering information and opinions from you all, and also about something else. Okay, I'll let you know in a minute. But do we have any public comment? Does anybody from the public want to? Gary, go for it. Can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. How you doing, guys? Great. Gary Stroud,
Good.
District 2, CPC Vice President, African-American male, dedicated dad, and I'm looking forward to working alongside with you guys in any capacity needed or whatever you might need. I'm not going to keep you long. I see Sandman's putting a lot of sand in a lot of people's eyes here on the screen. So I just wanted to just probably add an addition. It came to mind real quick in one of your mission statements that you mentioned. I was going to add in there like a lot of other meetings that have like AA and a lot of other committees about having, I guess, in the form that the person feels comfortable in that safe space with saying that we're a non-judgmental committee, where, because a lot of people, like when they try to come out there and they want to express themselves, the fear of being judged or labeled or censored and saying, wow, well, this person's this or that. Wow, I mean, I think having that added, that the person feels comfortable, so that they have that comfort zone, that they can express themselves and not feel any type of, I guess not say backlash, but any type of criticism. When they express their situations out there, we see that every day. People are censored, labeled, whatever, but a person should feel at that point where they can come to any committee and express themselves without having to be that, feel that way, being judged. We have that in a lot of other meetings. It's expressed that we don't say certain things or do certain things. I think judgmentalness is one of the major things that we all need to do. Everyone has the right to their opinion or whatever it is, or their belief, and we should adhere to that and respect it.
Thank you, Gary. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think
And
making that commitment.
If you guys ever need anything else, like I said, I won't keep my email address is on the RTM. I'm more than happy to give you whatever advice, be the liaison for CPCC, or I don't know what it is, the concierge, Mr. Oster, me being. And yeah, I'm definitely here for you guys. Whatever you, and definitely Mel Motel. She's amazing. She's
Thank
awesome.
you.
All right, guys, you have a good
Great.
night, and anything you need, please email me. Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
so much.
Thank
Stay
you, Gary.
safe. Bye.
Any other public comment? We are making very ambitious agendas and getting through them to some degree. So I apologize for not making space for this earlier.
We had planned on having it in the middle of the meeting, I just want to say.
We did. And Maya's doing a last minute edition of the list of groups, NFI. Yeah, and I'm gonna say to anybody, committee member or member of the public, if you have a community group that you feel like should be engaged in this process, you can email us. Our email address, I wanna make sure I get it right, is CSRT at protonmail.com, PROTONMAIL.com. Okay, it is 8 o'clock, folks. Thank you. We got some good stuff done here today.
I'm so excited that we get to, start calling people and asking questions and doing the work. I'm really, really grateful for you all and your support and guidance in this process.
And in our next meeting, we are going to come back with some more question defining. So that will be part of it, as well as defining and being decisional about some of these public forum, pieces. Thank you so much. And you'll be hearing from us. Please make sure you're just emailing us back directly with just information. We will not be making decisions in email.
Thank you, guys.
And
Thank you.
I'm going to type the email right now
Thank you.
to everybody. And Darlene, it's the one you've been using to talk to us. All right, folks, have a great night.